the banks don't make loans. And therefore, the customer would have no basis, wouldn't even have a thought of making a complaint. We looked at how the banks operated. First, we found differences in branch locations, where branches had been closed and opened. Differences in which real estate agents the banks were marketing to. And differences in where customers could put in a loan application. One lesson, I think, was how small actions, perhaps unintentional ones, could have a huge impact in perpetuating a segregated system. And I'd like to mention a later project for the Boston Globe looking at traffic stops in Massachusetts. Our series was called Speed Trap. It's online. An interesting thing about being stopped by an officer for speeding is that we were all speeding. If you get a warning, if you get a ticket, how do you know whether you're being treated equally? If you got the warning, did everyone else get one? If you got the ticket, is everyone getting a ticket for that speed from that officer on that day? So it's similar to being a bank customer or a real estate customer. You would have no basis for making a complaint. What we found was that in Massachusetts, who gets a ticket and who gets a warning for the same offense is pretty easy to predict if you know the race, sex, and age of the driver. For example, women were much more likely to get a warning, especially younger women, up to about age 40. It's the same as who gets roles in Hollywood. We wrote about a college student, a young woman who got 5 warnings in 6 weeks. Minorities almost always got the ticket, especially Black and Latino men. So there seemed to be some racial profiling at work in the decision being made at the window by the officer. Again, the customers wouldn't know. Maybe even the officers wouldn't know how it breaks down. But you know, a difference with the current investigation is that with home mortgages, with public records, we were looking at where mortgages were made. With the traffic tickets, we were able to use public records to see who got what ticket or warning. And then we had to piece together how it happened. But with Long Island Divided and our project using video, we're not coming along later looking at records. With the video camera, you can watch people violate the law. Also, I think it really matters that you see specific agents, their faces, and the names of their companies. Having that caught on video really may, I think, increase the impact and the chance that there will be some changes in the system.
Great. The Newsday investigation has become the most prominent example of the existence of race-based bias in real estate. Why did Newsday start the investigation in the beginning?
Well, Brian, so to set the scene, Long Island stretches more than 100 miles east of New York City out into the Atlantic Ocean. It's about 3 million people in 2 counties, a suburb of New York City, perhaps the most heavily segregated suburb in the nation. What we mean by that is, although there's a lot of diversity overall with people from all races and nationalities, especially African Americans are concentrated in very few communities. Out of more than 200 communities on Long Island, a majority of the Black residents live in only 8. We had heard stories, anecdotes through the years from Black home buyers who encountered problems trying to shop for a home in a wider or somewhat integrated area. And we'd heard this even from our own colleagues at the newspaper. We decided to follow the methods used by fair housing agencies with testing, with the addition of hidden cameras for video and audio. That's legal in New York, and it's legal in most states, including Indiana. Most state laws require only one person, only one party in a conversation, and that can be the home buyer, the tester, to consent to audio recording. It's legal. But hidden audio recording is not legal in about a dozen states. But still, you can have testing everywhere. Testers can be interviewed, debriefed. We can look at the listings that they were given. Now, let me show you just a little introductory part of our documentary film. The project is called Long Island Divided, and we called the film Testing the Divide. All of them are at the same address, newsday.com/divided. What happened in this little video clip surprised us, but we saw it over and over again. One customer receives service from an agent, while another customer in the same circumstance, seeing the same agent, is refused service.
But you don't want to go there. It's a mixed neighborhood.
Mixed neighborhood.
If agents are courteous and professional, how can you know that they're treating you equally compared with someone of a different race or ethnicity?
I have to say it without saying it, you know.
Behind smiles and handshakes, how do you know if they're giving you fewer options or suggesting different areas?
I'm not going to do anything more unless you don't want to store your car to buy your friend.
Or that rules don't apply to you and another home buyer in the same way. Long Island is one of America's most segregated suburbs. Newsday set out to discover what role real estate agents might play in keeping it that way, potentially affecting the quality of lives.
Technically, as a real estate agent, we shouldn't tell the buyers.
In house hunting, it's nearly impossible to see evidence of hidden discrimination. You would never know unless you go undercover.
In one test, Johnny Mae Alston was the black tester and Cindy Parry was the white tester, and they met with Anne-Marie Quealy-Bichon at Signature Premier Properties office in Cold Spring Harbor. They asked for the same thing. As often happens, the agent discussed getting pre-qualified or pre-approved for a mortgage by a bank, showing how much a buyer can spend on a house.
Pre-qualified, I guess. My husband's working with somebody in a bank. We've done some preliminary talks, about getting pre-approval.
Neither had been pre-approved or pre-qualified. Here's what the agent told the black tester.
So I really need that. I won't take out any money unless you have a pre-qualification letter. So I need to. So that means I can't pre-qualify for a mortgage. Oh, so that means I can't go out to see anything. I won't do it. You can try another person, but I don't have the time.
And without pre-approval, here's what the agent told the white tester.
What is your availability? When can you start looking at houses? I would say not this coming week.
Cindy received 79 listings from this agent. Johnny Mae couldn't get any listings. And Cindy, the white tester, received 2 home tours. They had the same finances, the same budget, and they made the same request in the same area. But one was white, the other was black. The agent treated them differently.
Wow. Phil, can you give us a summary of the test? Who was tested and what was the outcome?
Yes. So, Brian, our Newsday team focused on home sales, no rentals, sending out first-time home buyers. We'd send a white home buyer and then an Asian home buyer shopping for their family, or white and black, or white and then Hispanic. And we would mix up who would see the agent first. The home buyers gave the agent the same circumstances. They were first-time home buyers, so selling another property was not involved. We chose testers of the same gender and roughly the same age. We dressed them in the same business casual style. We bought shirts for the men. I went shopping at Nordstrom for similar purses for the women. They asked for the same number of bedrooms and had the same family size. And they were prepared to give the same income and same credit scores, but rarely were asked for any financial information other than mortgage pre-approval status, as you saw, on which they were the same. We shopped for houses from entry level. Now, Entry level in New York City prices is about $400,000 to the high end, $7 million. Now, $7 million won't get you Alec Baldwin's house in the Hamptons, but it'll get you into his neighborhood. But it was always the same price range given for both testers in a pair. And they saw the same agent. Now, that would not be necessary for a fair housing investigation or lawsuit. Under the law, two different agents at the same brokerage are also supposed to treat customers equally. But we thought it would be more fair and more persuasive to have the same agent see both customers. How did we pick the agents? We didn't. The brokers picked which agents would be tested, though they didn't know it. Whoever was on the board to handle walk-ins or phone calls or internet contacts, that was the agent we tested. We did 86 of these paired tests at 12 companies, 12 brands that together represent more than half of the sellers in our market. Familiar names: Coldwell Banker, Keller Williams, Century 21, Remax, as well as some large and small regional brands. Our team then reviewed more than 200 hours of the videos to see how the customers were treated, and analyzed and mapped the listings they had been given to see what school districts and communities and neighborhoods they were directed to. We didn't feel comfortable being the referees, so we had two fair housing experts review each test to decide if there was equal treatment. One had run a testing program for the Department of Justice, and the other is the law professor who wrote the textbook on fair housing law. Only if both of our referees independently threw a flag did we call a penalty on an agent. But we didn't publish yet. Before we published, our team gave the agents and their brokers details and invited them in so they could watch the videos and respond to our findings before we published. So this was a careful, it took more than 3 years. This was not a drive-by investigation. Now the results. The agents gave unequal treatment in 40% of our tests. And the results varied in interesting ways. Asian buyers were treated differently than their white counterparts 19% of the time, so 2 out of 10. Hispanic buyers were treated differently than their white counterparts 39% of the time, 4 out of 10. And Black buyers were treated differently than their white counterparts 49% of the time, 5 out of 10. Most of the attention has been on that high difference for Black customers, but don't lose sight of the rest. If 4 out of 10 Hispanic buyers, if 2 out of 10 Asian buyers are being treated poorly half a century after the civil rights laws were passed, those seem like high numbers as well. We viewed this project as testing the gatekeepers in real estate to see how they perform. 2 of the 12 companies, 2 of the smallest regional brands, were the only ones to pass all of their tests. It's fair to say that most of the major national and regional real estate companies were contributing to the racial segregation in our suburbs. I guess the question you have to ask yourself is, would the results be any different if we repeated the test in your community? If this weekend, if 4 retiring police officers from Indianapolis came shopping for homes in your community, and 1 white, 1 Black, 1 Asian, 1 Hispanic, not to mention other racial or disability or other groups, would they, with the same price range, go home on Monday receiving from all your agents the same listings? Now, what sort of differences did we see? First, we saw steering. Agents directed 1 out of 4 of our minority home buyers into different communities, different school districts altogether than their white counterparts. We also saw differences in how buyers would be screened or pre-qualified. One minority buyer would be asked for ID, but the white buyer would not by the same agent. Some agents wouldn't help our Black or Hispanic buyer at all unless they signed an exclusive contract with that brokerage, but didn't require a contract of the white buyer. And then there were inappropriate comments by agents. It's interesting, minority buyers were not subjected to racial comments, didn't hear any inappropriate remarks, and we're past the days of signs that say whites only. But it was the white buyers who heard the inappropriate comments about race that violate the fair housing laws. Here's a video clip that highlights this problem of inappropriate comments.
And they really took over Springs and Northwest Woods area.
Here, an agent gives conflicting advice about Freeport.
I like Freeport. Now you have a bad school district, and that's not good for resale value.
All the school bus, see the moms that are hanging out on the corners.
But you don't want to go there. It's a mixed neighborhood. It's mini United Nations.
Because you might be more comfortable in a certain demographic area that isn't heavily one way or another in terms of the people.
Bayshore has two school districts, Brentwood and Bayshore. You don't want to have Brentwood school districts. You want to have Bayshore school district.
I can't say anything, but I encourage you, I want you to go there at 10 o'clock at night if you want to buy diapers. Go to that 7-Eleven. They didn't buy there.
No, that's great.
I have to say it without saying it. You know, you have the knowledge of the areas.
Yes.
I don't want to use the word steer, but I try to use the word educated the areas. You know?
Yeah. How are you, Russ? Hey, Russ. Good. How are you?
You're either waiting for the owner or waiting for the agent to show up.
You don't want to be. I don't think you should be in Elmont. I think you should probably just be Franklin Square.
And I remember specifically, he talked about steering.
Yes, that's what he said. Steering, yeah.
Yeah. And in the same breath, he mentioned, well, steering's bad, but this is what I'm going to do.
There's something called steering. No steering, you know, like steering.
Oh, like a car or something?
No, like a horse, even.
It may be that some agents have gotten a message through the years that complying with the fair housing laws is some sort of political correctness, that it means not saying the wrong thing or not saying the wrong thing to the wrong person who might complain about it. Our tests suggest that we need more attention to steering, to what listings you're giving, to differential treatment. In other words, on what people do and not just what they say. And are agents giving the same advice to all clients? Are they treating all clients equally?
Okay, but now that we're talking about steering, what forms did you see this unequal treatment take?
Well, it's interesting. Steering is sort of an imprecise term, and it's often used as a catch-all for various behaviors. Let me just describe those behaviors. Telling one person there is no housing in that area in your price range. You won't find anything for your money there. But then showing housing in that price range to another buyer. We saw that happen. Making unsolicited comments about the race or ethnicity or religion of people who live in an area, or comments about the schools, comments about crime or resale values as a way of encouraging or usually discouraging someone from living in an area, especially while giving contrary information or being silent on that aspect of things with another buyer. That's steering. You saw an agent tell the white buyer to avoid an area because of poor resale values while telling the minority buyer, you'll like it there. We also saw differences in the level of service. Overall, our white testers got 50%, 50% more listings than their black counterparts. Now, we've been discussing this in terms of individual buyers, but look at it neighborhood by neighborhood for a minute. Both testers would ask for an area, let's say within half an hour of downtown. And that area, that circle, would include many communities or neighborhoods or schools. But sometimes in the wider residential parts of that circle, listings would be given only to our white buyers. So minorities were steered around those communities. And then there were, you know, that's what we were testing for. But there was something else that happened that surprised us. Inside that same circle, there are minority communities with homes for sale in the price range for both buyers. But neither buyer gets those listings. Those were the communities or neighborhoods with more than a modest amount of black population, and the agents steered around those for all buyers. Well, our legal experts said, wait, who has the lawsuit in that case? It's a long list. Not only are the white and minority homebuyers being steered illegally, both the white and minority homebuyers are harmed by steering and have a lawsuit. But the communities themselves are being harmed, the governments, and anyone who has tried to sell a home in those areas, and their listing brokers have a lawsuit under the Fair Housing Act against the brokerages that are steering around their communities. You know why? Fewer buyers means lower prices, lower home values, lower home equity, less tax money for schools and playgrounds and libraries. Here's a video clip with sort of a classic example of steering. An agent tells one man shopping for his family that an area would be a good place to live with the nicest neighbors, while the same agent warns another man shopping for his family that it's a dangerous place.
Kelvin Toon is a black man in his early 50s, and he went in to meet with an agent involving a test in the Brentwood community, a community that is 80% Hispanic and black. The agent communicated to Kelvin, our black tester, that she enjoyed meeting with clients from the Brentwood area.
Every time I get a new listing in Brentwood or a new client, I get so excited because they're the nicest people.
When we sent Kelvin's counterpart in to meet with the same agent, the white tester was actually warned about Brentwood not being a nice place.
The nursing home we need to be near is in Brentwood. Okay. And so we found a couple that are in Brentwood.
Pretty close to each other.
Okay. And it just seemed like those would be handy also for going.
Do you want to give me them and I'll look into them for you? Or?
Yeah, I can do that.
That warning came later to the white tester saying there was concern about gang activity in Brentwood. This agent wanted the white tester to know, but that information wasn't provided to Kelvin, the black tester. The listings centered black tester Kelvin in Brentwood with 27 house listings, while the white tester got 0 listings in Brentwood and was directed towards much whiter neighborhoods.
Bill, do you think that the testers, or I'm sorry, the agents in the documentary were knowingly steering? I mean, you can assume that some of them were because of the statements that they made, or do you think some of it's just an unconscious bias?
It's interesting, Brian. I think this is a real important question. There were agents who would say things like, I shouldn't be saying this, but that's sort of the real estate equivalent of hold my beer. But legally, the first point is that it doesn't matter if it's conscious or unconscious. The Fair Housing Act and your state and local laws cover behavior, conduct, not thoughts or motives. The law is not a mind reader. You know, we don't ask burglars if they intended to come into your house. We don't ask tax cheats if they intended not to report their income. If an agent is treating one person better than another similarly situated person, and the difference between them is one of the 7 categories in the Fair Housing Act, the agent has violated the law. To remind you, those categories are color, race, religion, national origin, disability, sex, and family status, usually meaning being pregnant or having children. You also have, you may have state and local laws that can include other categories. It is interesting, however, to speculate about the motivations of the agents. If you want to stop something from happening, you have to consider why it's happening. Some agents may in effect be profiling, assuming that the person of color can't really afford homes in the price range they've given, or can't qualify for the mortgage, or will have bad credit, or will be wasting their time, while accepting the same price range without question from a white buyer. One of the tricky things about profiling is that it doesn't work. We usually talk about profiling as though it's a shortcut to success. We have TV shows about FBI crime profilers. But experts say the real problem with profiling is that it's so ineffective. Let's think of a different context. Let's say you want to stop school shootings from happening. Who plays violent video games or who dresses a certain way at school is not a good predictor of who will be a school shooter. You understand the profile fits too many good kids and may miss the kid who's planning an attack. What is a better predictor? Acquiring weapons, hiding them, telling other students of plans, watch out, don't be in the cafeteria on Thursday. Or think about airport safety and counterterrorism. Religion is not a good way to identify who will be a terrorist. You waste too many investigative resources on the wrong people and miss where you should be applying your resources. And in real estate, race is not a good way to identify which customers can afford a home. You leave too much money on the table if you assume that people of color can't be good customers. Besides, it's illegal. So why do some agents do it? Some agents may think, consciously or not, that they'll make money faster with less effort if they show people homes where you'll feel comfortable. You heard an ace say something very close to that. But why assume that people want segregated neighborhoods? Besides, say it with me, it's illegal. Some agents may not have a bias themselves, but may be bowing to bias that they expect from others, sort of operating with the lowest common denominator. Maybe agents fear that a seller would be angry if they brought a minority buyer to the home, or that the neighbors, who are potential customers in the future, may be upset if the agent is seen to be integrating an area. Or agents could think that appraisers or lenders may be biased, and that would make it harder to close a sale. There's recent evidence of disparities in appraisal and in lending. None of that matters. Steering is illegal. I suppose somewhere in the world, a few agents may be prejudiced, but I assume that that is a tiny group, so small as to be irrelevant to our discussion. As others have pointed out, there's just too much steering for it to be accounted for by outright interpersonal prejudice. That's why people talk about a systemic issue. In general, on issues of race, it's pretty easy to apply all the heat to the question, who's the bigot? Who in our office might be racist? Are they saying we're racist? It's much more productive to apply light to the question, how does it work in our office? What are our procedures? is what we're doing sure to treat people equally? How might some differences get through? Because under the law, it's conduct. It's what you do that counts. I also think it's interesting to consider the point of view of the home buyer, even if in our case, they were actors testing the agents. Remember, one of the characteristics of profiling, of unequal treatment, is that people usually don't know they're being treated differently, and therefore they'll never complain. Our testers often came back from the real estate office to the newspaper office telling us, that agent was so nice, she was so helpful. And they only learned the truth when our team brought the buyers together to look at the listings and the map of where the listings were and to watch the videos. Here's a clip where you'll meet some of our testers and also hear from a fair housing expert who works with them.
It almost makes me wish that the racism is more explicit so that I would know about it.
Too often I hear people who maybe aren't as familiar with this kind of work say, oh, well, they were just testers. But all you have to do is tell someone, which I have to do on a fairly regular basis, that you were turned down because of your race, and tell them the circumstances that occurred on a particular test. And you will see just how real and painful that injury is.
Elmont, it's okay, it's good, they're very close to the city. Some of them are not as nice, Elmont.
I do remember him, he was nice, and I do remember him pointing out on the map.
Oh, he loved that map. I remember that.
Yeah, he had the map, and he's like,
Some of these towns, in my opinion, are not necessarily the greatest in terms of school districts, safety, crime, resale.
One of the patterns that surprised us was that some agents, time and again, began their presentations to the buyers. Remember, these were new customers with inappropriate comments or information or guidance that violates the fair housing laws. This agent with the map, he looked like General Patton planning the invasion of Sicily, but he had a different invasion plan for buyers of different races. For the whites, it was don't get off the highway until you get past these neighborhoods. Note that it didn't seem to be offhand, casual comments. These weren't slurs uttered when somebody cuts him off in traffic on a home tour. This was a second generation realtor. It seemed to be the sales pitch. It seemed to be the standard guidance for narrowing your home search. I hate to say it, but for some agents, it seemed that steering was a big part of the service that they were selling.
So what role did the school districts play into this?
I don't know how it works in Indiana, but in New York, we heard agents over and over again explain to our buyers, everything is by schools. Agents would tout one district over another. Some districts were blue ribbon and others were declining. Often they gave different information to different buyers. Notice that, let's just step back, sort of some context. America's school districts are so segregated by race in many communities that directing someone to a certain school is the same as directing them to an area with a higher or lower minority population, whether or not you mention race. It's hard to believe, but America's schools are more segregated now than they were 30 years ago. If you count how many children are attending schools that are more than 75% white or more than 75% non-white, schools are more segregated than when I graduated from high school. School segregation and housing segregation are intertwined. Now, around the country, some agents have picked up the idea, well, I just can't talk about schools at all. You may have heard agents say, I can't mention schools. But the Fair Housing Act doesn't say that. Agents can give straightforward, factual information. Agents can answer questions or refer customers to brochures or websites with information. The problem arises when agents are picking and choosing different districts for different customers, or giving different information to different customers, or making comments about the demographics in schools to steer customers. Here's a discussion of schools from our video, and you'll hear from the law professor who was an advisor on our project.
I said, do you really want your future children going to Amityville school districts?
We're going to try and stay away from Freeport, Roosevelt, Hempstead for now because of the school district.
This part, the Salisbury part, is demand because the schools are much better.
In Newsday's 86-pair tests, agents often applied a laser-like focus on school districts, highlighting their perceived quality when recommending places that house hunters should consider buying or avoid. Fair housing experts say touting or disparaging school districts can put agents in jeopardy because talking about school districts can be taken as a euphemism for race.
There's a few districts that I know I would I won't look in those towns.
Oh, okay.
You know, like Freeport and Baldwin and Amityville, which is part of Massapequa schools, but it's just certain parts of Massapequa.
If the customer asked about the quality of the schools and the agent responded with accurate information, I think the agent would be fine. The problem with talking about differentials in schools is that at least in the last 10 or 15 years, that has been a proxy for race. They don't mention the race of the community. Good schools are available in these areas. Those areas I'd stay away from because they have poor schools. I want to ask, did you tell that to the other tester? If you're only giving that information to one tester of the two, and the only difference is the race, then you've provided what I call differential service.
You only want, if you're in Massapequa, you only want school district 23.
Okay.
You don't want 6 in Massapequa because that takes in Amityville, and you're not going to like those schools.
The agent writing there helpfully made lists of schools and sent the two buyers back to the newspaper office with different lists. Schools are the hardest part of this, so let's think through part of this together. How do you discuss school quality without violating the Fair Housing Act? And what information do you have about school quality? First, notice that you don't have to talk about race. You understand. You don't have to mention race to be steering illegally. You all understand that if the districts vary in race and you're promoting one district over another, you're steering, especially if you are giving different information to different buyers or giving information to one buyer but being silent on that with the other. Now, what should agents do? Some companies do suggest that agents just not talk about schools. Tell the customer to do all their own homework. Others suggest that you limit information to answering factual questions. You can say if your kids went to that school, but stay away from the trap of using vague labels such as good or nice or high performing, labels that may be introduced in the conversation by the customer. Here's one of the complicated parts. If it's okay to share websites with objective information, is it okay to talk about school test scores? Write this on the blackboard 100 times. School test scores don't tell you how good a school is. School test scores don't tell you how good a school is. You can do the next 98. School test scores tell you mostly how wealthy and educated are the parents who send their kids to that school. In America, wealth and education of parents is a pretty good predictor, not perfect, but pretty good predictor of their children's test scores. And race in America is a pretty good predictor of wealth and education. You see the problem. A quote, high-performing school may just be a wealthier area, and a school with lower test scores may actually be the higher performing school where good teachers are bringing up the scores of students who are growing up in working class households. Word about this is getting around. Just recently, greatschools.org, the school ranking website that so many agents refer customers to, has realized that this is a fair housing pitfall. It's changing its ratings, especially in states where all it was basing the ratings on were test scores. It's realizing that that perpetuates segregation. And the National Association of Realtors has spoken up in favor of this change. So you want a bottom line. Can you talk about school test scores and refer parents to websites listing them? Yes, you can legally, if you give the same information to everyone.